It was a quiet evening, the kind that promised nothing more than the comfort of a warm dinner and the soft hum of evening news playing in the background. In the small suburban home, nestled between rows of identical houses, Mark sat at the dining table. His fingers drummed absent-mindedly against the surface, his gaze distant, as though he were somewhere far away, lost in thought. His wife, Rachel, moved about the kitchen, the scent of garlic and simmering tomato sauce filling the air. But despite the calm in the house, an undercurrent of tension simmered beneath the surface, a storm waiting to break. Rachel had been acting strangely for days. Mark had noticed. The way her eyes lingered on him sometimes. Too quiet, too searching. He had brushed it off at first, thinking it was nothing. But tonight, something felt different. He couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to say something that would change everything. "Mark." Rachel's voice broke through his thoughts. He looked up, meeting her gaze. There was a calmness in her eyes, but something more, something sharp, something unsettling. She stood still by the counter, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. He gave her a small smile, trying to appear unaffected. "Yeah, I need to ask you something," Rachel continued, her voice steady but with an edge he hadn't heard before. "Is there anything you want to tell me? About you and Grace?" His heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, the room felt too small. It felt like the walls were closing in around him, the air growing thick, suffocating. Grace. The name hung in the air like a curse. His sister-in-law, the woman he had betrayed his wife with, the woman he had slept with not just once, but several times over the past few months. He had thought he was being careful, but now, standing there, he realized just how stupid he had been. Rachel's gaze didn't waver. It was as though she already knew, as though she had seen through every lie, every deceitful glance, every stolen moment. His breath hitched in his throat. There was no escape. "Rachel," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't lie to her, not with the weight of her eyes upon him. But at the same time, he couldn't admit the truth. Not now. Not when everything was on the verge of falling apart. Her eyes narrowed, and she took a step closer to him, her voice quiet but seething with anger. "How long, Mark? How long have you been screwing my sister behind my back?" The words hit him like a slap across the face, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his betrayal. The shame, the guilt, the raw sting of his own actions. It was all coming crashing down, and he knew, deep in his gut, that there was no turning back. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Panic clawed at his insides. What could he say? Could he apologize? Could he make it right? No. The truth was, there was no way to fix what he had done. Not now. Rachel's eyes were filled with tears, but there was a hardness to her gaze, a resolve he hadn't seen before. "I trusted you, Mark. I loved you. And you..." Her voice broke, but she swallowed hard, regaining control. "You betrayed me. With her. My sister." She shook her head in disbelief, the shock still fresh in her voice. "How could you?" He opened his mouth again, but this time, no words came. What could he say? How could he defend himself? He had crossed a line, one that he could never uncross. Suddenly, Rachel's hands were on the edge of the table, gripping it tightly, her knuckles white. "Tell me you love me, Mark. Tell me you didn't love her. Tell me you didn't choose her over me." The desperation in her voice, the way she pleaded with him, it was too much. It was too late. "Rachel," he murmured, standing up and taking a step towards her. "I never meant for this to happen. I don't know what I was thinking." His voice cracked, but he knew it was too little, too late. He could see the devastation in her eyes, and it made his chest tighten with regret. But beneath that regret was something darker, something terrifying. Rachel didn't back away as he took a step closer. Instead, she stared at him, her eyes burning with an intensity he hadn't expected. "You're a coward, Mark," she spat. "And now, I'm done." The words hung between them like a threat. He could see her resolve hardening, her anger reaching a boiling point. It was no longer just about the affair. It was about the betrayal, the deception, and it was clear she wasn't going to forgive him. Mark's mind raced. What had he done? He had ruined everything, and now Rachel was about to destroy him. There was no going back. "I never wanted to hurt you, Rachel," he said, his voice shaking with desperation. But she was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face, unable to listen anymore. He took another step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, as if the decision had already been made, his mind snapped into focus. This was the only way. He had to end it. He had to stop her from destroying him, from exposing everything. She had already threatened to go to the police, to tell everyone, and he couldn't allow that. Not after everything he had done. The sharp glint of the kitchen knife caught his eye. The blade gleamed in the dim light, almost calling to him. In a flash, he reached for it, his grip tightening around the handle. Rachel's eyes widened as she saw the movement, but it was too late. With a quick, savage motion, he plunged the knife into her chest. Her body froze for a moment, as if she couldn't quite process the pain. And then, slowly, she crumpled to the ground, her lifeblood spilling out onto the floor. Mark stood over her, breathing heavily, his hands trembling. His mind raced, adrenaline flooding his system. He had done it. It was over. But as her lifeless body lay on the kitchen floor, a terrible silence filled the room. For a moment, everything stood still. The world outside the kitchen seemed to vanish, leaving nothing but the horrific stillness in the room. Mark's breath came in jagged gasps, the knife still clenched tightly in his hand. He stared down at Rachel's body, her lifeless eyes wide in a frozen look of disbelief. Her once vibrant face was now pale, the blood pooling around her as if it were part of a nightmare that he could no longer wake up from. His mind raced, but the only thing that seemed clear was the overwhelming sense of dread that gripped him. What had he done? There was no going back now, no undoing what had just happened. But amidst the panic that threatened to consume him, another thought emerged, clear, cold, and terrifying. He couldn't let this be the end. Not yet. He had to make sure this stayed a secret. He had to cover his tracks. He couldn't let anyone find out. Before he even realized what he was doing, Mark stepped back from her body, his legs unsteady beneath him. He glanced around the kitchen, the normality of the room mocking him. The same table they had sat at so many times before, the same counters, the same fridge, but now, everything felt foreign, warped in a way he couldn't explain. It was as if the whole house were closing in on him, suffocating him with the consequences of his own actions. He had to think fast. He quickly wiped the knife on Rachel's shirt, the blood smearing across the fabric. His heart pounded in his chest as he dropped it on the floor. His breath came in shallow gasps as he backed away, looking around wildly for a way to dispose of the evidence. The door to the living room was open, and beyond that, the hallway leading to the bedrooms. Her sister's bedroom. Grace. The name rang in his mind, louder now than ever before. He could still hear her voice in his head, could still see the betrayal in her eyes when she had learned the truth. She had seen the way Mark looked at her, the way their secret had unfolded. It had all led to this moment, but Grace had no idea what Mark had done, or how close she was to becoming another casualty of his wrath. His mind was in turmoil, but a dark clarity settled over him. He couldn't leave Rachel's body exposed like this. He had to move her, had to make it seem like an accident. He could do it, he was sure of it. He just had to act quickly, with no mistakes. He glanced at the door, his hands shaking. He wasn't sure how long he had until anyone, noticed she was missing. The plan had to come together fast. There was no room for hesitation now. Mark grabbed the kitchen towel and began to wipe the blood from his hands. His thoughts scattered. What if someone heard her scream? What if neighbors came by? The last thing he needed was for anyone to suspect something was wrong before he could control the narrative. His gaze turned to the staircase that led upstairs, to their bedroom. Rachel's phone sat on the counter, carelessly discarded in her rush to confront him earlier. He almost reached for it, but stopped. It would be too obvious, too much of a risk. If Grace got wind of this, if she found out, there would be no hiding it. He had to do this alone. He couldn't let anyone else in on it, not even her. The dread intensified. He wasn't a murderer. He was just a man who made a terrible, selfish choice. But the guilt, the overwhelming weight of what he had just done, crushed him. His chest tightened as he realized he had crossed a line he could never come back from. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It wasn't just betrayal. No, he had ended it. Ended her life. And that finality was like a shackle around his soul, tightening with each passing second. Mark stepped toward the back door, breathing heavily as the evening air outside seemed to offer him no relief. He knew he had to hide the body, dispose of it, erase every trace of his crime. The car. He could use the car. It wasn't ideal, but it was the fastest way to get her out of the house. He could dump her in the woods, somewhere no one would think to look. It would be just another missing person, a tragedy that no one could make sense of. But the thought of dragging Rachel's body, her cold, lifeless body, into the car, into the trunk, made him gag. The reality of it was too much to bear. His hands trembled as he staggered out the back door, his mind flashing to images of Rachel's face. Frozen in horror, it felt like he was suffocating, and no matter how many breaths he took, it wouldn't stop. And yet, his legs carried him forward. His mind, fueled by panic and fear, had already shut off the part of him that could think rationally. He had made his decision, and now there was only one way out. The next few hours were a blur. Mark moved with a cold, calculated precision, his movements mechanical. He had already placed Rachel's body in the trunk of the car, covering it with a blanket to hide the bloodstains. Every sound, every passing second, felt like it was stretching his sanity to the limit. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside the house, made him jump. His heart beat loudly in his chest, his breath quick and shallow. He knew the risk he was taking. He knew there was a chance he could get caught. But the weight of his secret was so heavy, so crushing, that he couldn't bear to face the consequences. And so, he drove. He drove for miles, the road stretching out before him like a never-ending ribbon of darkness, until he reached a remote area on the outskirts of town. The woods were quiet, the trees towering above him like silent sentinels, watching him. He parked the car and got out, his legs shaky, his mind spiraling with dread. He opened the trunk, his eyes glancing once more at Rachel's body, covered and still. Her betrayal still echoed in his mind, and he gritted his teeth against the memory. No one would find her, he told himself. No one would know. He dragged her out of the car, his hands shaking as he did. The forest was quiet, eerie in its silence. And as he dropped her body into a shallow grave, he didn't feel relief. He didn't feel freedom. He felt nothing but an overwhelming sense of emptiness. It was late by the time Mark returned home. The house was still, Rachel's absence hanging like a dark cloud in the air. He couldn't escape it. Her absence was palpable, and it gnawed at him, making every shadow feel darker. The phone rang, shattering the silence. He froze, his heart in his throat. It was Grace. "Mark," she said, her voice shaky. "Where's Rachel? I've been trying to reach her, and she's not answering her phone." He swallowed hard. His mind raced, but his voice was steady, betraying none of the chaos that raged inside him. I don't know. I haven't seen her either. I thought she was just upset. She probably went out." Grace's voice cracked. "Mark, don't lie to me. You didn't do anything to her, did you?" The words hung in the air like a terrible omen. And for the first time that night, Mark felt the ice of fear creep into his veins. The next few days were a blur of questions, accusations, and unspoken truths. The police arrived at Mark's doorstep the morning after Rachel's disappearance, and it felt like his world shifted on its axis. The knock on the door had been soft at first, hesitant, but the moment he opened it, everything turned sharp, focused like a blade slicing through the calm. The detective was tall, imposing. His eyes were tired, as if he had seen too much in his career. And yet, they locked onto Mark with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Mr. Brown?" the detective asked, glancing at the name on the notepad in his hand. "We have some questions about your wife's disappearance. May we come in?" Mark swallowed, feeling the lump in his throat swell as if it were a living thing, choking him. He stepped aside, allowing the detective and his partner into the house, the air heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a tomb. "Where is she, Mr. Brown?" The detective's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, as though he already knew something Mark didn't. I don't know," Mark stammered, trying to keep his voice steady. "I came home late last night. She wasn't here when I arrived. I thought maybe she had gone to see Grace." He paused, his mind spinning. "I don't know where she is." The detective studied him closely, eyes narrowing. There was something about the way he scrutinized Mark, as if he could see right through him. Mark's stomach churned with dread. He had never been a good liar, and he could feel his nerves fraying under the pressure. "We'll need to take a look around," the detective said. "Any idea why she might have left?" "No," Mark replied, his voice flat. "We were having issues, but nothing serious. Not enough for her to leave like this." The detective gave him a long look, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Brown. We'll be in touch." As they left, Mark stood there, frozen in the doorway, feeling the oppressive silence of the house close in on him. He had been careful. He had covered his tracks, hadn't he? But now, as the seconds ticked by, he wasn't sure anymore. Every small noise, every rustle in the air, felt like a threat. The police were getting closer. They were starting to ask the right questions. He needed to move fast. It didn't take long for Grace to show up. She arrived 2 days after Rachel had gone missing, her face pale and strained, eyes red from crying. Mark had expected her, of course, but the reality of her presence in his home sent a wave of anxiety crashing over him. She stood in the doorway, her gaze fixed on him. There was no warmth in her eyes, only cold fury and disbelief. "Where is she, Mark?" Her voice was soft but laced with an undeniable edge of accusation. "What have you done with her?" Mark took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. "Grace, I don't know where she is. I told the police everything I know. She might have left on her own. Maybe she needed space." Grace shook her head, disbelief written all over her face. "You don't get it, do you?" She stepped into the living room, her footsteps heavy. "I know what you did. I know about the affair. I know what you've been doing behind her back." Mark's heart skipped a beat. The word stung, a reminder of the betrayal he'd tried so desperately to bury. But now, in the face of Grace's accusations, it felt as if the walls were closing in around him. She had to know. She had to. "I didn't." Mark's voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. "I never meant for this to happen, Grace. I didn't want it to go this far. But Grace wasn't listening. Her eyes burned with rage, her fists clenched at her sides. "Don't you dare try to justify it. My sister trusted you, and you?" She choked on the words, taking a step back as though she couldn't bear to look at him anymore. "You killed her, didn't you? You killed her because she found out the truth. I know it." Mark's world tilted. His pulse pounded in his ears, and for a moment, he thought he might collapse. She was right. Grace had seen through the lies, but he hadn't expected her to confront him like this. He had expected something different, something quieter, more calculated. "Grace, please," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. He didn't know what he was pleading for. Forgiveness? Mercy? A way out? She stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet, trembling voice, she said, "I'm going to the police, Mark. I'll make sure they know the truth." Fear shot through him like an electric current, and before he could stop himself, words spilled from his mouth. "No, Grace, don't. Please. You don't understand." It wasn't supposed to end like this. His voice was thick with desperation. I made a mistake. I was weak, but I never wanted to hurt anyone. I never wanted her dead. Grace's face hardened, and she stepped back, shaking her head slowly. You've already done enough, Mark. You can't undo what's been done. With that, she turned and walked out of the door, leaving Mark alone in the silence of the house. A house now filled with nothing but dread and a sense of impending doom. Mark could feel the walls closing in around him. Every sound, every rustle, every creak of the house now felt like a warning. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating the gravity of his actions. The lies, the betrayal, the murder, everything was crashing down on him. By the time the police returned, he knew there was no escape. He had already made his choice, and now he would have to face the consequences. The detective stood in the doorway again, his expression unreadable. Mark Brown, we've found the body. It was buried in the woods just outside of town. You need to come with us. Mark's heart sank. There was no more running, no more lies, no more chance to make it right. The drive to the police station felt like it lasted an eternity. The flashing lights of the squad cars were a blur, and Mark could barely keep his eyes open as the weight of his actions settled over him like a suffocating blanket. His hands were cuffed behind his back, the cold metal biting into his skin, a constant reminder of how far he had fallen. The detective who had spoken to him earlier was now sitting across from him in the back of the car. His face was as unreadable as ever, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, satisfaction, perhaps. After all, they had finally cracked it. They had him. Mark kept his gaze focused out the window, unable to look anyone in the eye. His mind replayed the moments leading up to Rachel's death, the way he had stood over her, the panic, the darkness that had clouded his judgment. He had been so sure he could get away with it, that the lies would be enough to protect him. But they hadn't been. Now, all that was left was the cold truth. He had murdered his wife, and nothing could erase that. As the car pulled up to the station, Mark's heart raced. The building loomed ahead, the fluorescent lights inside casting harsh shadows across the pavement. He was ushered out of the car and into the station, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet hallway. He could feel the eyes of the officers on him, their gazes heavy with judgment. But there was no escaping this. He had walked himself into this trap, and now it was time to face the consequences. The detective led him into an interrogation room, where the harsh lights illuminated the sterile, white walls. Mark sat down at the cold metal table, his legs shaking uncontrollably. The detective remained standing, watching him closely, waiting for him to break. You're going to tell us everything now, Mark, the detective said, his voice low and calm. We've found the body. We know what happened. The question now is why? Mark swallowed hard. The room seemed to close in around him, and he felt the sweat bead on his forehead, his breath coming in shallow gasps. There was no going back now. He had to say it. He had to own up to what he had done. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Mark began, his voice barely above a whisper. It started with the affair. I didn't know how to stop, and when Rachel found out, I panicked. I didn't want to lose everything, but when she confronted me, I just snapped. His voice cracked, the weight of his confession crashing down on him. I didn't want her to leave me. I didn't want to lose her, but I couldn't stop it. The detective nodded, his expression stoic. And when you killed her, Mark, did you think about what it would do to her family? To Grace? Mark's chest tightened, and for a moment, he was silent. The guilt, the shame, it overwhelmed him. No, he whispered. I didn't think about that. I didn't think about anything but myself. I just wanted to cover it up. I wanted to make sure no one would ever know the truth. The detective leaned in, his voice lowering. And now? What do you think about it now, Mark? What do you feel? The question hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything Mark had done. He closed his eyes, his mind spiraling with the realization that it was too late to make things right. Too late to undo the damage. I feel nothing, Mark admitted. His voice was barely audible, filled with a sense of emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. I feel numb, like everything I've done, everything I've tried to build, it was all a lie. The detective didn't say anything for a long moment. Mark could feel the intensity of the silence, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, the detective spoke again, his voice cold. Final. Mark Brown, you are under arrest for the murder of your wife, Rachel Brown. You have the right to remain silent. The trial was nothing short of a nightmare. The courtroom was filled with spectators, some curious, some horrified, all eager to hear the details of the gruesome crime. Mark sat at the defense table, his eyes cast downward, unable to look at the faces that judged him. He could hear the whispers of the audience, the murmur of shock and disbelief. It felt like they were all closing in on him, waiting for him to crumble, waiting for him to break. Grace was there, too. She sat in the front row, her face pale, her eyes empty. The pain of losing her sister was evident, but the rage burned deeper. She couldn't look at him, not directly. And that was the hardest part. The fact that even her anger didn't seem to be enough to break through the wall of cold, indifferent guilt that surrounded him. The prosecution laid out their case methodically, painting Mark as a man who had killed out of selfishness, out of fear of losing everything. They played the recording of his confession, the words he had spoken to the detective, and it was as if the whole room could feel the suffocating weight of his guilt. There was no way to deny it. There was no way to escape it. He was guilty. The defense tried, of course, to plead for leniency, to show that Mark was a man driven to madness by his actions. But the evidence was too overwhelming. His fingerprints were all over the knife, and the bloodstains were enough to convict him in the court of public opinion, if not in the eyes of the law. In the end, the verdict was clear. Mark Brown, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of your wife, Rachel Brown. The words hit him like a physical blow. His mind went blank as the weight of the sentence sank in. Life. He would spend the rest of his days behind bars, a prisoner of his own guilt, his own choices. There would be no redemption, no escape. The years that followed were a blur of monotony. Mark's life in prison was nothing like the life he had once dreamed of. He spent his days in a small, gray cell, haunted by the memory of Rachel's face, her wide eyes filled with disbelief, her body cold and lifeless on the kitchen floor. And Grace, he never saw her again. She had moved on with her life, far away from the wreckage he had caused. But he knew, deep down, that she would never forgive him. No one would. Mark had destroyed everything. His marriage, his future, his humanity. And now, he had nothing left but the suffocating darkness of his own mind. Every night, as he lay on the cold, hard cot in his cell, he could still hear Rachel's voice echoing in his head, asking the same question over and over again. How could you? There was no answer. But never forget, betrayal and selfishness bring irreversible consequences, shattering relationships and one's future, while avoiding accountability and honesty only amplifies the damage, leading to a destruction that could have been prevented. Want more stories like this? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment so you don't miss out on our exciting stories.